On to the third presentation. Sheila Ainon will look at the search of defense mechanisms. African Union and European defense structure will be addressed by the professor. You have 15 minutes, professor. Thank you very much. Sheila Youssef.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. All right, thank you, Prof. Merhaba, for the kind introduction. Prof. Cengiz, Assalamualaikum, Merhaba. I hope everyone is in good health in these trying times. I pray for all of you to have a strong immunity against COVID. And I also pray for the success of this conference and the success of ASSAM, Islamic Union, thereafter, in this world and in the hereafter. Now, I have a very challenging time because I have to cover 4 defense alliances within 15 minutes. And I think I will just speed read my slides, okay? Oh, God, where is it? How do I get that? Just I want to get to my...
You can use share screen, Miss.
Wait, where? What?
Bottom of the screen, share screen. You can see now.
Wait. Oh no, it's not. Where's the share screen?
Bottom of the screen. Middle.
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
Okay.
Push this button.
Oh no, wait. Yeah, you do it. You do it. Okay. There's a file. Yeah, this one. Okay. No, yeah. All right. Okay. Is that visible? Yeah. All right. Is that visible to everyone?
Yes, yes.
No, thank you.
Right.
All right. Okay. As I told you before, I will look at the security and defense mechanisms of NATO, CIS, EU, and AU Defense Organization, and I'll pose the following questions. Firstly, what are the challenges faced by these alliances? Secondly, what are the lessons to be learned from their flaws or weaknesses of these alliances? And thirdly, can ASRICA pattern itself on existing alliances minus all the flaws? We'll start with NATO first. I have 58 slides, and so I will just speed up, okay? So now, well, there is a progression in this world where the world has become bipolar and then unipolar with only US as the dominant superpower. And now we are on the path towards a multipolar world in which we not only have NATO and the USA as the actors, but we also have Russia, China, and India playing important roles. Okay. Now we have 30 NATO members. All right. About the NATO security and defense mechanisms, NATO is a political and military alliance, and its NATO's essential and enduring purpose is to guarantee the freedom and security of its members through political and military means. All right. And also NATO is committed to the peaceful resolution of disputes And these are carried out under Article 5. Collective defense is at the heart of the alliance and creates a spirit of solidarity and cohesion among its members. NATO is committed to the principle that an attack against one or several of its members is considered as an attack against all. And this is enshrined in the Article 5. NATO also has this transatlantic link by which the security of North America is tied to that of Europe. And it is an intergovernmental organization, and the resulting sense of shared security among members contributes to stability in the Euro-Atlantic area. The NATO has this 2010 strategic concept, and its core tasks include collective defense, crisis management, and cooperative security. So can NATO members put the political disharmony of recent memory behind them to forge a genuine sense of unity? So here we are talking about Muslims not being united, but I think these defense alliances have a problem also. So what are the key challenges for the alliance in the months ahead? The changing US demographics is a threat to alliance unity. Can you pass that? I can't see this one. Oh no. Okay, this one. Yeah, this one. Okay. The relationship between the US and Europe has been shifting long before Trump's antics, but Trump made it worse with his love-hate theatrics with the alliance. But what is more crucial is that the American public is getting fed up and increasingly reluctant to expand US power abroad. And also the crunch came in August 2019, when the US withdrew from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in August 2019. Now the INF is an agreement with the Russian Federation that limited the types of weapons systems the nations involved could pursue. It limited both nations from fielding both short-range and intermediate-range land-based ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and missile launchers that could be used to house either nuclear or conventional payloads. Now, concerns are raised as to how European NATO member states will react to the collapse of a treaty that for more than 30 years has succeeded in removing from Europe nuclear and conventional ground-based ballistic and cruise missiles with ranges between 500 and 5,000 kilometers. So here is the situation on how to maintain a united stance on the INF. Okay. Now, the other challenge is that there is a changing European defense. Europe's defense debate is all about America. The US has not welcomed the prospect of stronger EU security and defense role. The Trump administration has reacted negatively to new EU defense schemes, expressing concern that they can duplicate NATO efforts and harm transatlantic interoperability. Now, the US Secretary of State had said that EU defense cooperation should neither duplicate NATO assets nor discriminate against non-EU NATO members, nor have the effect of decoupling the EU from the transatlantic alliance. And the Secretary General also said that any attempt to distance Europe from North America will not only weaken the transatlantic alliance, it is also risking dividing Europe itself. And European unity cannot replace transatlantic unity. So critics view this as being partly misplaced fear, partly exaggeration, and partly based in actual concerns. But the real concern is, of course, on competing interests. And NATO must work out on how to recast the partnership between the US and Europe without the former viewing it merely in transactional terms and the latter indulging in anti-American posting. Right, so now we have NATO's precarious role in West Balkan. With ongoing political dramas and threats in West Balkans, NATO has to juggle its role to ensure peace and stability, and if not wielded properly, it can threaten the peace and security of the wider region. Now in Kosovo, NATO's active military presence in Kosovo for 20 years since the war ended has played a key role in helping to maintain peace and security through the NATO-led International Kosovo Force. Now, the Kosovo War was an armed conflict between the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, Serbia, and Montenegro, which controlled Kosovo before the war, and the Kosovo Albanian rebel group known as the Kosovo Liberation Army, with air support from NATO. Now, the war started in February 1998 and it ended in June 1999. However, in 2018, the government of Pristina controversially adopted legislation to initiate a transformation of its 4,000-strong Kosovo security force into a regular army. This irked NATO as it fears such a move will provoke neighboring Serbia. In light of these developments, the North Atlantic Council is reviewing NATO's engagement with Kosovo. Now, NATO is also concerned over the political stability of Bosnia-Herzegovina. In December 2018, NATO announced its readiness to implement its membership action plan for Bosnia-Herzegovina. While the Federation of Bosnia-Herzegovina seeks both NATO and EU membership with increasing military cooperation from these organizations, the country's other autonomous entity, Republika Srpska, remains openly opposed to NATO membership, preferring to cultivate close ties with Serbia and Russia instead. Now, the effects of cutbacks in US contribution to NATO, we'll look at Afghanistan. Severe cuts in the US contribution to the NATO-led non-combat resolute support mission is a cause for serious concern among NATO allies and partners. Though cutbacks are essentially operational, the management of this process will be highly political. And even in Syria, following the defeat of ISIS, US decided to draw down its forces in Syria in 2018, which came as a surprise for US partners, including NATO. Now, the defense spending of allies, excluding the United States, has jumped by 130 billion over the past 5 years. The increase is not entirely due to Trump's cajoling, but NATO started spending more after Russia invaded eastern Ukraine in 2014 and illegally annexed Crimea. The China factor. This is a looming threat to NATO. China has now become a significant threat to NATO, Euro-Atlantic relations on at least 3 levels, an expanding military posture in the Indo-Pacific and a more assertive presence in Africa and the Middle East, an economic and technological threatens Europe's own industrial and technological base, and a growing great power play between Washington, D.C. and Beijing, with Europe caught in the middle. So NATO's approach to China is limited to only low-key dialogue and some statement of concerns about the militarization of South China Sea island features. It has been suggested that working more closely with like-minded partners such as Japan or Australia could be an effective way to better manage the China factor. NATO leaders' divergent views on security issues. And this is something that we can learn from this. Major differences within the alliance were shown at the summit of NATO leaders on December 2019 in London. Most of the disputes were between the Europeans. It is not between Europe and the United States. The main protagonists, US President Donald Trump, French President Emmanuel Macron, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and German Chancellor Angela Merkel, each came with their own agenda. For Trump, it was, as ever, about money. His criticism of NATO was that it is obsolete and that it consists of free riders that take America's security guarantee for granted. In the same breath, he took a jab at Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for not coughing up enough money and told off Macron for insulting NATO by calling it brain dead. So how to deal? The 3 big unresolved issues among the Europeans are how to deal with and define terrorism. France and Turkey have different perceptions about the terrorist threats facing their country. The Turkish president wanted NATO leaders to agree that the Kurdish People's Protection Units fighting the so-called Islamic State in Syria is a terrorist movement. Defeating the Islamic State is one of his main priorities, and he wants the Europeans to help. His goal hasn't been helped by Trump's decision to pull out American troops from Syria, which in turn denied the YPG militias support and dealt a blow in defeating the Islamic State. With Erdogan determined to defeat the YPG, Macron fears this policy will distract from the main strategic goal of ending the Islamic State's role in Syria and further afield. So how to deal with Russia? Other alliance members such as Poland and the Baltic states and Germany see Russia as the major threat and declared that Russia's aggressive actions constitute a threat to Euro-Atlantic security. Macron has a different view. For him, Europe's security depends on forging a relationship with Russia. Despite the fact that Europe's security has been threatened by Russia's military involvement in Ukraine, not to mention its heavy military role in Syria. Macron's wish for Europe to reset relations with Russia is not one that is shared by Merkel. Similar to the Baltic states and Poland, she has no illusions about Russian President Vladimir Putin's determination to divide Europe, weaken NATO, and silence the regime's opponents. Indeed, on December 4th, Germany expelled 2 Russian diplomats. So what to do about European defense? The different perceptions of terrorism and Russia feed into the third issue affecting NATO's European allies. How should it defend itself in the future? Macron believes that Europe should be prepared for a time when the United States weakens its commitment to NATO. Whether it does or it doesn't, Macron wants some answers as to how Europe can think and act strategically. So in response to his unforgettable remark that NATO was brain dead, NATO leaders agreed a forward-looking reflection process to further strengthen NATO's political dimension, including consultation. And that process is led by Stoltenberg. Okay, but the last thing that NATO needs is a talking shop. And dodging these 3 unresolved issues is no longer an option. The new art of security and space. Russia has not only applied unconventional threats, but also resorted to an increase in the use of highly sophisticated ones. For example, Russia has employed less conventional means, often described as hybrid measures against NATO allies in vulnerable nations such as Ukraine, Georgia, or even Syria. These range from using chemical-grade weapons for targeted assassinations, cyber attacks, disinformation, and election meddling to military shows of force in the Baltic and North Atlantic regions. Besides, NATO seems to be no match with Russia, as NATO merely sticks to a broadly analog approach in planning, command structure, troop deployment, and long negotiations, whilst Russia has gone digital in their defense tactics. Global connectivity presents new security challenges for NATO, and this is especially so pertaining to critical infrastructure interdependence. Therefore, addressing by hyperconnectivity and interdependence, especially with respect to modern critical infrastructures like energy, communications, transport, etc., is at the heart of NATO's push to increase its resilience and that of its members. Article 3 is most closely associated with NATO's current resilience deliberations. NATO considers resilience to be the result not only of the military capacity of the organization, but also of the civil preparedness of the allies. So this assumption is based on the belief that well-prepared allies are less likely to be attacked, making NATO as a whole stronger. All right. I just won't proceed. Let's look at the Commonwealth of Independent States, and it has been termed as a loose, porous, and non-homogeneous union. I will not go through that. Okay. The CIS members, there are 9 of them, and the CIS security and defense mechanisms consist of the CIS Charter, which establishes the Council of Ministers of Defense, which is vested with the task of coordinating military cooperation of the CIS member states. So to this end, the Council develops conceptual approaches to the questions of military and defense policy of the CIS member states, develops proposals aimed to prevent armed conflicts on the territory of the member states or with their participation, gives expert opinions on draft treaties and agreements related to the questions of defense and military developments, issues related suggestions and proposals to the attention of the CIS Council of the Heads of State. Well, we'll go to the challenges of CIS. So the so-called Sovietness has proved to be an impediment to the integration of former Soviet republics. The Commonwealth is a kind of a historical process accompanying the civilized divorce of the Soviet republics and a painful progression from union to CIS to regionalism. In terms of raison d'etre, it was vague from the outset because it was built on phantom feelings, pains, and euphoria, and it remains hopelessly unfathomable today. The CIS has failed to become a real international organization, nor will it ever become one. Therefore, reform of the Commonwealth is practically unfeasible. And the CIS today struggles for cohesion. And it has been said that the CIS is more like an annual heads of state conference, and divisions continue to grow in the former USSR republics. For the European Union, security is one of the top priorities of the EU political agenda. Well, Europe has finally woken up to the need to treat defense seriously. For the past few years, the EU has started a series of initiatives designed to stimulate European defense cooperation and build defense capabilities. This is in line with the EU's controversial vision for strategic autonomy as laid out in its 2016 global strategy. Now, the key elements pushing Europe towards a more efficient use of resources and greater coordination of national security and defense efforts and making security one of the top priorities of the EU political agenda are the rapidly changing geostrategic order with new emerging powers, armed conflicts on the EU's doorstep, the rise in hybrid warfare, cyber strategic infrastructure, and increasingly blurred boundaries between internal and external security. The borderless nature of security threats, the lack of interoperability and poor cost effectiveness, and the current fragmentation of defense market. EU members, 27. UK is not there anymore. EU security and defense mechanisms. So following the adoption of the implementation plan on security and defense in November 2016, there were a series of new initiatives launched to enable member states to undertake defense research, enhance defense coordination, increase investment in defense, and develop joint defense capabilities. These include the Permanent Structured Cooperation, PASCO, an inclusive instrument enabling interested member states to strengthen their defense cooperation in specific areas. The Coordinated Annual Review on Defense Card is a process aimed at obtaining a better overview of member states' defense-related activities and spending. And the European Defense Fund intended to boost the performance of European capabilities through innovation in projects for the collaborative development of defense products and technologies. So, the challenges to EU defense integration is the ambiguity of EU's vision on strategic autonomy, flawed security and defense mechanisms, budget cut in defense funding, the lack of transparency and accountability, and the impact of coronavirus. There is no precise, universally agreed definition of strategic autonomy, even though the term has been frequently used in European debates on security and defense. So the lack of conceptual clarity surrounding strategic autonomy means the term is often misunderstood, both inside and outside Europe. Not all EU member states are comfortable with the concept, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe. So one may term the autonomy as a European Defense Union, strategic autonomy, common defense, or even European army, but the concept points out to the same vision. Europe desperately needs an autonomous capacity, at least to solve crises in its neighborhood that impact it directly or indirectly. example Syria, and to all extent possible, to take an active part in its own defense, be it against old or new threats. So yeah, they have this permanent structured cooperation, but it has flaws. And it is said that it is more of a framework for cooperation projects rather than a proper process to integrate defense budgets, plans, capabilities, and industries, and carry out interoperability exercises in order to form an autonomous capacity. It is suggested that it should encompass a capability process to build the operational capacity of an avant-garde of willing and able member states to conduct crisis management missions outside the Union, which is the essence of the common security and defense policy. And also, it is said that the framework is barely linked to the CSDP. PESCO's main program, which is military mobility endorsed by 24 member states, has little to do with crisis management, but everything to do with NATO. So the European Defence Fund is the most promising initiative in the realm of the European defence, but for this fund to materialize, there are very stringent conditions to be met. So the Europeans need to vote the budget according to the provisions made in the draft multi-annual financial framework. Finally, the most important condition for the fund to be a success is to link it to an efficient defense planning process. This is not the case yet. The European Peace Facility was launched in 2018 to set up a new off-budget fund. At present, discussions on the launch of the EPF seem to be stalled due to the fact that some governments are not willing to consider the common funding of crisis management operations based on Article 4. All right. So now budget cut in defense funding. During the 2021-2027 budget negotiations, the proposed funding for military mobility has been drastically cut. The lack of transparency, impact of coronavirus. Okay, let's look at the African Union. We have.
Süremizi oldukça açtık ama toparlayabilir miyim?
Okay.
I'm afraid you have to wrap up.
Yeah, okay, right.
That's
all. Thank you.
devam ediyor. Örnek olarak Kırım, Irak, Suriye, Libya, Afganistan.
Evet, teşekkür ediyorum.
But thank you so much.